Welcome back to part 2 of the Jaguar. At this point I decided we needed a little more color on the cat's face. So I used my Rembrandt 409.3 burnt umber and 411.5 burnt sienna to add just a little more color. I'm using light pressure over all of the cat. We want to get all the base coats in before we add the spots, because we only want to add the spots once. There's a lot of spots. So here I've decided to use a little of the 411.5. It's the redder color, just to bring up the color just a little, add a little more. If we add it in layers and lightly, we won't overload our painting and fill up our tooth. So we want to do it gradually. And I can use it on the end to get into the places that are hard to reach or a little smaller. Now, using the 229 black new pastel, I'm going to add the spots on the Jaguar. So I am just putting in a fairly solid amount, using the tip of the new pastel to apply the color and make it dark enough. We have a guide because we can see the charcoal pencil marks that we put down originally. So now we can go over those and darken up those spots before we add the final hairs to our Jaguar. Here I'm adding some dark color around the nose with the 229 black. Just a little bit. Needs to be a little bit darker. Now I'm kind of shading the area with the black. Putting my glassine down to protect my painting and to rest my hand on. I'm continuing to add the spots around the Jaguar, just taking my time. This does take a good amount of time to get all these spots in. So take your time to do it. If you get tired, then go do something else and come back. But do take time to carefully add all of the spots. It'll make a difference in your final painting. Don't rush through it. Notice also, I'm not putting in hairs. I am putting in the solid area of the spot. I'm going to speed things up a little bit while I add some more of the spots. Back in real time now, I'm carefully adding the little spots around the eye of the Jaguar. Little tiny ones down here. We're going to come back and add our final coats of hair after we finish putting in all the spots. I've sped things up a little bit more while we get through the rest of the spots on the Jaguar's head. Now we're back in real time, and we are finishing up the black areas on the side of the cat's face. And now I'm going to use the 229 black to darken inside of his ears a little bit more. Now I'm going to add some background color, and I'm using unison colors for this. I'm using 3 colors. I'm using dark number 8, dark number 12, and green number 14. This is dark number 8. It's kind of a dark blue-green. I love the unisons, especially for doing backgrounds because they're nice and soft. We want to add a variety of color. Now we're switching to a different shade, but these are the unisons, and we're going to work around the cat and put in the background before we add the final hairs. Because the unisons are softer, it's easier to add a background. They fill up the tooth very quickly. That is 633.5 permanent yellow-green, which is a lovely color. That's a Rembrandt color. So we're using Rembrandts and unisons to do the background. That's a little bright, so I'm going to tone it down some. And I can rub it right into the nap with my fingers. So we're going to continue to work around the Jaguar. These colors are making a beautiful background. I want to put the light next to the Jaguar's face so that it kind of pulls the attention in there. I want it to blend better, so I'm going to put a little bit more unison over the brighter green of the permanent yellow-green Rembrandt. And as you can see, I can rub this in with my finger. It blends very well. I'm adding a little more dark green in the corners. Just blend the colors and mix them in a way that pleases you. You can see I put a glove on. I tend to get the green all over me when I work. So it's a good idea to wear gloves when you use softer pastels. Here I'm using a 276 new pastel buff on its edge to put in some little cream colored hairs on the top of the Jaguar's ear. I'm going to show you another way to do that. I'm using my Conte pencil number 49, which is about the same color as the buff, to pull up a few hairs. So that is another way to add the hairs in this painting. I also used a white charcoal pencil to add a little bit of color there, and now I'm switching to my white new pastel, which is number 211, which is far brighter than the charcoal pencil, as you can see. I'm going to add a few more hairs with my 276 buff new pastel, using the edge and sometimes using the corner to make short little strokes, and then when the edge gets dull and no longer makes a nice sharp stroke, I rotate it to get another sharp edge. And then when they all get dull, I sharpen my pastel again. Now this is the 211 new pastel white, so I'm adding some white hairs to his ear. Just take your time when you do this. Make sure your stick is sharp so that you get that nice soft look that you want for your animal's fur. Now I've switched over to my Conte pencil number 47. And now I'm using Conte pencil number 17. That's adding a nice darker hair to that area. And my white charcoal pencil to pull out a few very sharp white hairs in that area. Now I've switched back to my 276 buff, and I'm going to add some lighter hairs on the cat's face. Now you can see I'm adding teeny tiny little hairs around the spots. The spots are actually black hair that sit down in between these light buff colored hairs. So I'm being very careful to add the hairs around the spots. So here I'm adding them behind the black spot as I work around the cat. I'm switching between the pencil and the new pastel to add these little tiny hairs. Now I realize this is time consuming, but it's really worth the effect. So take your time and add all these little tiny hairs. I think that the 276 buff new pastel produces a brighter and sharper hair. But the pencil is another way to do it, and some of you may prefer to use a pencil. I'm working under the eye, adding short little strokes. And I'm also being careful to make sure that my strokes go in the direction the fur grows. I've switched back to the pencil and putting hair on the outside of the cat's face. I've switched to my 211 white to make it just a little bit brighter on that outside edge. So I'm continuing to add these little hairs in between the black spots. Rotating my stick in my hand as I go and just carefully adding the hairs. Here I've switched back to the pencil to add a few hairs. Generally I'll go back and forth, going back to the 276 buff now. When I'm doing this, I usually keep a couple of this color sharpened next to my painting so that I don't have to stop to sharpen it. I can just switch out pastels and then sharpen them both at the same time later. Some of my spots need to be a little blacker, so I'm using my 229 new pastel to just darken some of them up a little bit. Here I've switched back to the 276 and I'm going to add some lighter hairs on the side of the cat's face before working down the nose. So here I'm working down his nose, adding the light colored hairs. I don't want them to look so individual, so I'm just kind of using a zigzag motion and rotating the stick in my hand as I need to kind of vary the spacing of the hairs so that they don't look like they're all lined up in a little row. Now here I've switched back to the pencil again, just adding a few strokes. I like to give you a choice when I can of different things to try. As you can see, the pencil is not as bright as the 276, but that works fairly well on the side of the nose, where it's more in shadow. I'm using my 211 white to add some white hairs at the bottom tip of the nose. Here I'm using the Conte 17 to add some light orangey hairs. Now switching to the 47 to add some brighter ones on top. Now here I have my 263 new pastel to add some brown on the side of the face. Now I'm back to using my 211 new pastel to add short little white hairs on the left side of the Jaguar's face. It's white on this side of his face, but the hair is short, so I want to make sure I use short strokes and go in the direction that the hair grows. I'm using my white charcoal pencil to add a couple of whiskers. Now after adding these white hairs, I'm using my black 229 new pastel to draw a few black lines from the nostril into the fur. It helps to blend one area into another and to make it look like it belongs. So now I'm using the white to add the white fur on the right side of the Jaguar's face, using short little hairs going in the direction that it grows. Here I'm using the white to put the white hairs in on his chin. He's really starting to come to life now. Since I've finished adding the white hairs, now I'm using the 229 black to add some little black hairs back into the white area. I'm using my 259 gray to add a little shading down at the base of the nose. And now I've switched to the black, added just a little bit of that. Now this is the 263 Indian Red. So I'm adding a darker red color very lightly on the shadow side of the Jaguar's face. This is the 353 Cordovan. I'm taking it a step darker. It really helps define the shape of his nose and the side of his cheek where he's laying down. I'm going to use my 211 white pastel to add whiskers at the top of the Jaguar's muzzle area. I'm going to show you a little trick. If your whiskers get too fat, take your 9B graphite pencil and just kind of go alongside of them and you can make them thinner. It's a very useful tip. When you're adding your whiskers, be very confident of your stroke. Make sure your pastel is sharp, you've wiped any dust off of it, and just draw them in. I'm back to adding hair now with the 211 white new pastel. I'm going to add them under the eye, very short little hairs. I'm also going to add a few hairs over the top of the eye. Switching to my Conte pencil to get into some of these smaller areas to get the hair growing around the spots. We don't want to go over top of them, we want to go around them. I'm going to use my black new pastel to go in between the white hairs I previously added. I felt like I was losing the shape of my eye, so I wanted to restate that. I'm continuing to add hair on the Jaguar with my Conte pencil. I'm switching back and forth between the 276 buff and the Conte pencil number 47. I'm using my 229 black to darken a spot. Now if you'll notice, I'm kind of pulling up my spots a little bit, but we'll get into that more later to kind of help the spots blend in with the rest of the fur. I'm going to zoom in to this area of the Jaguar so you can see I'm using my 229 black new pastel to pull up some little tiny black hairs into the fur of the Jaguar. That helps to integrate the spots in with the rest of the fur. So I'm just putting little tiny strokes, and I'm doing the ones that I've already added the beige fur around. I don't want to add the black, try to pull up little black strokes until I have the beige fur added in. Here I'm using the dark gray 259 new pastel to add a little shadow in this area. So I'm just darkening that down a little bit. I'm continuing to add little tiny hairs on the side of the nose with my Conte pencil. And working around the spots. So I'm continuing to add hair with the Conte pencil and then use my very sharp black new pastel to pull little black hairs out into the fur. He's really looking very handsome. I'm going to work on the ear. So I'm using my 276 buff to pull longer hairs up on the ear, because the hair on the ear is a bit longer than the hair on the rest of the Jaguar. So I've got my 4 sharp edges, and I'm able to pull out some of these curly hairs that are inside the ear of the Jaguar. This is really the fun part of the painting, when we get to add the top hairs on our animals. So I'm working very slowly and deliberately, pulling these beautiful little hairs out of the ear. If I want to make a hair a little brighter, I just push a little harder on my stick and it makes it a little brighter. I'm continuing to add the little hairs around the spots, and we're directing them to curve around the side of the face. So I'm being very careful of the direction of the hairs. Just go slow and add them one by one. I've switched to my white 211 New Pastel to add whiter hairs as I work down the side of the face. Here I'm using the black New Pastel again to pull little black hairs out into the fur that we added with the 276 and the Conte pencil. So just by adding those couple of little hairs, it just makes the spots become a part of the entire fur of the Jaguar and helps them to look like they belong. So just pull a couple down. I'm also doing that in the direction that the fur grows. And here you can see I'm pulling a couple of cream colored hairs with my Conte pencil into the black spot. And that helps to integrate all of it together. Using my 211 white New Pastel to add whiskers onto the Jaguar. Now this particular whisker, that long one that I just added, I don't like the way it looks, so I'm going to try to fix it with my 9B graphite pencil, and that's not working either. So I'm going to see if I can make it disappear. So I'm going to use my 263 New Pastel Indian Red to cover it up a little bit, and then go back and use a very sharp white charcoal pencil to fix it. So before I do that, I'm going to put some more hair in right at the corner. Of the Jaguar's eye. Add back in my spots, make them a little darker with my black New Pastel. I'm using my 353 Cordovan to add some darker hair up near the ear. I can actually go in between the lighter hairs with my dark brown, which is very nice. And the black to add a few little, draw out a few little black hairs out of the spot. And a little more brown down around the nose area.